My antique store, Treasures of the Past, has been located on Art and Crofts Main Street for over 30 years. The display case with its soft light falling on Victorian clocks, silver teapots, and antique boxes has become my window to the world. Many people say I look like an antique myself. At 75, my hands are covered in wrinkles and age spots, yet still dexterous enough to determine the authenticity of a porcelain figurine or estimate the age of a locket with just a touch. It's Wednesday, a day when the store's usually sparsely populated. I sit at the counter, thumbing through the new arrivals from the latest auction, and my thoughts, like old photographs, turn over themselves. 52 years ago, I was a very different Elizabeth Wolfe, a young woman, with a 1-year-old son in her arms, and her husband's fresh grave in Ardencroft Cemetery. Robert died ridiculously, a heart attack at 32, when our Noah had just learned to walk. I remember standing at the funeral, holding the baby, who smiled and stretched his arms toward the falling maple leaves, not realizing that his father would never hold him in his arms again. "How will you manage on your own?" Shook my head at my mother-in-law, Agatha, who moved to her sister's house in Oregon 6 months after her son's death and took no further interest in our lives. And I managed. First, I worked as a secretary in a lawyer's office, then as an accountant in a local bakery, and in the evenings I embroidered beaded handbags to order. We rented a tiny apartment above the laundry. It was unbearably hot in the summer and cold in the winter, but it was Noah's and my nest. Every night I read him books, told him stories about the world that lay beyond Ardencroft. When he was older, we went to the library together, and I remember his enthusiastic whispering, "Mommy, I'm going to read all these books, every single one of them." On Noah's 10th birthday, I took him for the first time to a flea market in a neighboring town. It was there that I bought an antique pewter soldier figurine that turned out to be a collector's item. After reselling it, I earned enough to start a small business. That's how Treasures of the Past came to be. First as a corner in Chester Fielding's antique store, and then, when Chester decided to retire, I bought out his store. Noah grew up an intelligent and inquisitive boy. He was sensitive and eager to please everyone. Sometimes it bothered me that too often he put other people's desires before his own. "Mother, Mrs. Patterson said I could go to the movies with them, but I promised to help you at the store," he would say, and I could see the inner struggle in his eyes. "Go, of course," I replied, though the lonely evenings at the store were the hardest. By 18, Noah had grown into a tall, slender young man with his father's eyes, dark brown, speckled with gold. He did well in school and got a scholarship to a state university, but not a full scholarship. I paid for the rest on my own, putting money aside every semester, sometimes denying myself a new coat or dental treatment. "Mom, you shouldn't work so hard," Noah would say, coming in on weekends and catching me at the store well past midnight. "I'm doing what I think is right," I'd reply, not telling him that I'd taken an extra job appraising antiques for insurance companies to save up for a place for him to live. After university, he returned to Ardencroft. He couldn't find work in the big city, or maybe he was just homesick. He took a job teaching history at the local college, and I remember how his soul burned when he told me about his lectures, his students, the book he dreamed of writing. At 27, having saved enough, I was able to buy a small 2-story house on Oak Street with 4 bedrooms, a garden, and a veranda. The house needed repairs, but it was sturdy and cozy. "Mom, this is too much," Noah exclaimed when I showed him the house. But in his eyes I saw the dream of a hearth of his own. "Think of it as your inheritance that you get in your lifetime," I said without mentioning the sleepless nights and years of saving. I deeded the house to myself, an old habit of backing up left over from Robert's death. Noah moved in and lived there alone for a few years, occasionally inviting me over for dinner. He would make pasta with mushrooms, the only dish he knew how to make well, and we would sit on the veranda talking about books, history, his work. Sometimes I caught his gaze on me, thoughtful, warm. "You are the strongest woman I know," he told me once, and in that moment I realized that all my sacrifices had not been in vain. And then Pearl Huntington came into his life. Noah met her at an American history conference. She was the curator of a small gallery in a nearby town that specialized in historical artifacts. Tall, with perfect posture and cold blue eyes, Pearl came from a family of hereditary Huntington jewelers whose stores were scattered throughout the Northeast. I remember our first meeting. Noah brought her into my store, proudly introducing her. "Mom, this is Pearl. She knows antiques even better than you do." I noticed how she looked around the store, not with the interest of a connoisseur, but with an appraisal. How much is all this stuff worth? My simple dress, the unfashionable hairstyle, the old-fashioned watch on my arm. She absorbed the details with poorly concealed disappointment. "Fascinating," she said in the tone one uses when talking about a child's drawing of no artistic merit. "Noah tells me you're self-taught in antiques. That's so unusual. We have third-generation professional appraisers in our family." I smiled and offered tea. Over tea in the back room of the store, Pearl talked mostly about her gallery, her recent trip to Europe, and her family's ties to Boston museums. Noah watched her with admiring eyes, occasionally casting glances at me as if to ask, "Well, isn't she a miracle?" After they left, I sat looking at my hands for a long time. At 43, I looked about 50. The hard work had taken its toll. My hands were rough from constant contact with silver cleaning chemicals, my fingernails trimmed short. Pearl's hands, on the other hand, were flawless, with long fingers and perfect manicures. I thought then that those hands had never known real work. Noah and Pearl dated for 8 months before he proposed to her. During that time, my son and I's relationship began to change. He started coming to the store less often. Our dinners on the veranda became a rarity. When we did see each other, he often spoke in phrases that I felt were not his. "Mom, do you really wear those shoes with that bag?" Or, "Pearl says antique stores have to specialize in something specific. Otherwise, they look like a flea market." The wedding was lavish. The Huntington family rented a country club, and about 200 guests were invited. I was sitting in the front row, wearing a new dress I'd bought especially for the occasion, a pale blue one with lace inserts. "You look beautiful, Mom," Noah said, peeking in on me before the ceremony, but I could see the worry in his eyes. I realized later that he was afraid of whether I'd embarrass him in front of Pearl's family. At the wedding dinner, I found myself at a table with distant relatives of the Huntingtons, not at the main table with the bride and groom. Pearl's mother, Vivian, approached me during the cocktail hour. "Elizabeth, what an interesting dress," she said, examining me like a museum piece. "You know, my daughter has always wanted a mother-in-law who could fit into our circle. I hope you won't feel out of place." After the wedding, Pearl moved into Noah's house, my house to be exact. At first, I received invitations to Sunday dinners, but I felt like a guest, not a member of the family. Pearl always found a way to show that I didn't meet their new standards. "Elizabeth," she'd say, deliberately avoiding the word Mom. "We replaced all the towels in the guest bathroom with Egyptian cotton. You know, regular towels make me allergic. These were the towels I gave them as a housewarming gift. Or we decided to remodel the kitchen in a Mediterranean style. These old cabinets are totally out of style. Cabinets I painted with my own hands 5 years ago." Noah was silent during these conversations, sometimes smiling awkwardly, but never standing up for me. After these visits, I would return to my apartment above the store, sit in my old chair, and allow myself a few moments of quiet sadness before returning to work. One day, about a year after we were married, Noah stopped by my store unannounced. He looked embarrassed, rubbing a button on his shirt, a gesture from childhood, a sign of excitement. Mom, I wanted to talk about the house, he began without looking me in the eye. Pearl thinks we need to make some serious repairs, a new roof, a modern heating system, maybe an extension for her studio. But the bank won't give us a good rate on the loan because the house is, well, technically, it's yours. I looked at my son, trying to see him as the boy who once sat next to me on the couch, reading aloud to me so I could relax after work. But there was a grown man standing in front of me, speaking in his wife's voice. Do you want me to sign the house over to you? I asked bluntly. He hesitated. Not exactly. Maybe we could deed it as joint ownership? Then it would be easier for us to get financing. I was silent for a long time, weighing the pros and cons. This house was my insurance, my protection for my old age. But hadn't I bought it for Noah? Let's do it this way, I finally said. The house will stay titled to me, but I'll give written permission to renovate it. And if you need money, I can help. I have savings. Noah's face stretched. Pearl thought you'd agree to remodel the house. She's already ordered the remodeling project. Tell Pearl I respect her plans, but the house will stay mine for now. It's non-negotiable. I was firm, though something inside clenched at the thought of disappointing my son. He left upset, and a week later he stopped returning my calls. So began our estrangement, not an abrupt breakup, but a slow melting of the bond, like ice in the spring sun. The bell above the store door jingled, bringing me back to the present. Helen Nightingale, my longtime friend and neighbor, the only person who knows the full story of my relationship with my son, walks in. Hovering in the clouds again, Lizzie? She smiles, setting a basket of homemade cookies on the counter. Brought your favorite, cinnamon and apple. I smile back, trying to hide the sadness. Helen is my age, but unlike me, she is surrounded by a loving family. 3 daughters, sons-in-law who treat her with respect, and 7 grandchildren who adore Grandma's stories and cookies. Did you hear the news? Helen asks, settling into the visitor's chair. They say Noah and Pearl are having a baby. My heart skips a beat. I'm going to be a grandmother? Why didn't Noah tell me? No, I answer quietly. They didn't let me know. Helen frowns. Betty Parker saw Pearl at the drugstore. She was buying prenatal vitamins. Betty asked directly, and Pearl confirmed 4th month. I nod, swallowing the lump in my throat. 4th month, and I find out from Betty Parker, Ardencroft's biggest gossip. Don't take it personally. Helen covers my hand with hers. Maybe they wanted to surprise me, or were waiting until the deadline was longer. But we both know the truth. Ever since Pearl came into Noah's life, I've slowly but surely become a stranger to my own son. Autumn in Ardencroft has always been my favorite time of year. The maples along Main Street turn orange and scarlet, and the air is filled with a special scent, a mixture of fallen leaves, apple pies from Thompson's Bakery, and the smoke from the first melted fireplaces. But this fall brought with it a bitter realization. My son is expecting a baby, and I'm learning about it from the town gossip. For 3 days, I waited for Noah to call. On the 4th, I decided to call myself. Hello? Pearl's voice sounded cold and formal, like a secretary taking an unwanted call. Hello, Pearl. This is Elizabeth. May I speak to Noah? A pause. I could almost see her pursing her lips. He's busy, checking student papers. Then maybe you can tell me the news yourself? I heard you're having a baby. Another pause, longer. Yes, we are. We were planning on telling everyone at dinner at my parents' house next weekend. Everyone but me wanted to add me, but I held back. That's wonderful news. Congratulations to both of you. Can I talk to Noah when he's free? I'll tell him you called. That was the end of the conversation. Noah didn't call back until 2 days later, and that, I'm sure, after my second call and message on the answering machine. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. We wanted to wait for a safe deadline. Of course, I understand. I did understand. Losing a baby is something every pregnant woman fears. How's Pearl feeling? Fine, just constant nausea in the morning. The doctor says it's normal. I remembered my pregnancy, how nausea haunted me, not only in the mornings, but all day long. How Robert had held my hair when I vomited and put a cold towel to my forehead. If you need any help, you just say the word. I could make food or, it's okay, Mom. Pearl has an au pair. She comes 3 times a week. An au pair. The house I bought with my labor calluses now has an au pair, and I'm not even invited to come in. I'm glad you called, Noah continued, but I could hear the impatience in his voice. Listen, I gotta run. We have dinner with Pearl's parents. Sure, tell them I said hi. He hung up and I was left sitting by the phone, feeling like an outsider in my own son's life. The following months brought more changes. Noah and Pearl found out the sex of the baby was a girl, but they didn't invite me to the baby shower. I found out through social media, where Pearl had posted pictures, pink balloons, a cake that said, "It's a girl," and the happy faces of guests, including the entire Huntington family. I sent a gift, a 19th century antique silver rattle I found at an auction and restored with my own hands. The rattle returned a week later with a note from Pearl. Thank you for your consideration, but we cannot accept antique items for the baby for hygiene reasons. My hurt mixed with anger. Did she really think I didn't know how to properly handle antique silver? That I would endanger my own granddaughter? Attempts to meet Noah alone were also unsuccessful. When I asked him to lunch, he always found an excuse not to: work, nursery prep, or a visit from Pearl's parents. One day, I met him at the supermarket by chance in the cereal section. His cart was filled with organic produce and some exotic fruit I didn't even know. Noah, I called out to him, and he turned around with a surprised face. Mom? I didn't expect to see you here. He looked confused, like a student caught cheating. I live 3 blocks away, I reminded him. How's Pearl? How's the baby? She's fine. The doctor says development is perfect. He glanced at his watch. Sorry, I have to hurry. Pearl's cooking dinner for her gallery colleagues. Why don't you drop by for tea with me in the next few days? I asked hopefully. He faltered. It's difficult right now. Maybe after the birth when things settle down a bit. I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. Sure, I understand. As he walked away, I noticed him pull out his phone and start calling someone. Probably Pearl to report back on our meeting. Time was ticking. 6 months pregnant, 7. I sent messages asking if I needed help getting the nursery ready, offering my services to sew curtains or quilts. The responses were always polite but detached. Thanks, Mom, but Pearl's parents already got us a complete nursery set from a designer, or we ordered everything we needed online. I spent the Christmas holidays alone. Noah called on the morning of December 25th, greeted me with a curt greeting, and told me that he and Pearl were going away for the holidays to her parents' country home. I sent gifts and antique inkwell with his initials on it for Noah. He was always fond of such things, and an antique sapphire brooch for Pearl. I don't know if they liked the gifts. They didn't say a word. One January day, freezing cold with wet snow, Vivian Huntington, Pearl's mother, came into the store. She rarely came to this part of town and never came into my store. Elizabeth, she nodded, looking around with poorly concealed disdain. What a variety of things you have here. I rose from behind the counter, trying to look cordial. Vivian, what a pleasant surprise. What can I do for you? She took off her gloves, leather, impeccably tailored, and placed them on the counter. I've come to talk about the upcoming birth. Pearl is due in a month, and we're organizing a gathering for the immediate family right after we return from the birthing center. My heart beat faster. Had I finally been included in the family circle? I wanted to clarify a few things, Vivian continued, and her tone cooled my hope. Our family follows certain traditions. For the first 2 weeks after delivery, the mother and newborn need the peace and support of those closest to them. In our case, that's me, my sister Olivia, and possibly the baby's godmother, my oldest daughter Ruby. I remained silent, feeling her every word drive a wedge between me and my future granddaughter. We understand that you are interested. Vivian chose her words with the care of a diplomat, but Pearl is very sensitive, especially right now. Any stress can adversely affect lactation. And you think I'm a source of stress for her? My voice sounded even though everything was boiling inside. Let's just say you and Pearl have different views on a lot of things, from your parenting style to your approach to hygiene and safety. I clenched my fists under the counter. You mean the rattle? That was just one example. Pearl is very concerned about germs and allergens. Old things are a source of dust and potential pathogens. I wanted to tell her that an antique silver rattle was much safer than the Chinese plastic toys that would probably clutter the nursery, but held back. What exactly do you want from me, Vivian? She smiled, thin as a paper cut. Just understanding. Give Pearl time to adjust to her new role. Perhaps a month or two after the birth, we'll arrange a larger meeting where you can meet the baby. I nodded, not trusting my voice for an answer. Great. I'm glad we understand each other. Vivian put on her gloves and headed for the door. At the threshold, she turned around. By the way, Pearl is very attached to the idea that all gifts for the baby should be new and match their gift registry. I'll send you the link. After she left, I closed the store and went up to my apartment. I needed to be alone to deal with the feeling of being pushed out of the life of my only son and his child. In the evening, I called Noah, but the phone was picked up again by Pearl. Noah can't come over right now, she said. He's at the library working on his book. Please tell him his mother called. I deliberately emphasized the last word. Also, Pearl, your mom came to see me today. Silence then. Yeah, I know. She wanted to clarify the postpartum situation. She did clarify, very clearly. Elizabeth, it's not personal. It's just that I'll need to recover, get breastfeeding established. You understand how important that is. I did. When Noah was born, I had lactation problems. My milk didn't come in until the 5th day. And all the while, I struggled with stress and guilt. But there was no one around to support me, only the nurses at the hospital who advised me to switch to formula. I understand the importance of breastfeeding, Pearl, and I would never interfere or give advice without being asked. I appreciate that. Her voice sounded insincere. We'll be sure to invite you over when we get a little more settled in. The baby was born on February 7th, a girl 7 pounds and 3 ounces, as a short text from Noah informed me. The name was Lillian Vivian Wolfe, in honor of her maternal grandmother. No mention of me, not even a middle name. I sent a huge bouquet of roses to the hospital and a gift, a new music box with a ballerina, just like they wanted. The box played a Brahms lullaby, the same one I had sung to Noah when he was a baby. There was no response to the flowers or the gift. It wasn't until a week later that Noah sent a message with a picture of the baby, a wrinkled face in a pink bonnet. Meet Lillian, the caption read. I printed out the photo and framed it on the counter at the store. When customers asked who it was, I proudly replied, my granddaughter. But an emptiness was growing inside me. I was a grandmother in name only. A month passed. The promised invitation to meet Lillian never came. I called several times, but they told me it wasn't the right time. Lillian was asleep, or she had colic, or Pearl had just put her down and was resting. One day I decided to act directly, baking an apple pie. Noah had always loved my baking, and driving to their house unannounced. There were two cars in the driveway, Noah's old Volvo and a brand new Lexus that I knew belonged to Vivian. I rang the doorbell, holding the pie in my hands and feeling my heart pounding. The door was opened by Noah, and his face had that look of surprise on it, as if an alien was standing on the doorstep. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Brought a pie," I smiled, trying to sound casual. Figured young parents don't have time for baking. He didn't invite me in, instead stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind him. "This isn't a good time, Mom. Lillian just got over a bout of colic. Pearl barely put her down." "I'll be very quiet," I promised. "I just want to see my granddaughter." "At least for a minute." Noah looked exhausted with circles under his eyes and stubble that he usually shaved off meticulously. "Mom, I understand your feelings, but now really isn't the time. Vivian is helping Lillian and me. She has experience with children. And Pearl is very sensitive right now. Postpartum depression, hormones." I swallowed resentment. "I understand. Maybe another time?" "Sure." He took the pie from me. "Thanks for that. I'll call you when it's more convenient." He left for the house, and I was left standing on the porch, feeling like a beggar. Through the living room window, I could see Vivian looking at me with undisguised triumph. Days were adding up into weeks, weeks into months. Lillian turned 3 months old, then 6. I saw her only in the pictures Noah sent occasionally, always in Pearl's or Vivian's arms, never in his own. In town, I'd occasionally see them Pearl with her expensive stroller, often in the company of her mother or sister. They would walk in the park or go into a cafe. I tried to approach, but every time I received a polite but firm refusal. "Lillian just fell asleep. We have an appointment. We're late for a pediatrician's appointment." On one such day, I met them at the entrance to the park. Lillian could already sit in her stroller, looking at the world with her eyes wide open, brown eyes like Noah's, like Robert's, her heart clenched with tenderness and longing. "What a beauty," I said as I stepped closer. "May I meet her?" Pearl tensed, instinctively pulling the stroller closer to her. "Elizabeth, we're in a hurry. Lillian has a feeding regimen." "Just a minute." I looked at her pleadingly. "I'm her grandmother. I haven't even held her in my arms once." Pearl exchanged glances with Vivian, who, as usual, accompanied them. "This isn't a good time." Her voice sounded mechanical, like a recording on an answering machine. "Lillian has just recovered from a cold, and the doctor advised limiting contact." "I'm not sick," I objected, "and I would never come to see her if I wasn't feeling well." "That's out of the question," Vivian interjected. "Pearl, as a mother, has the right to decide who has contact with her child and when." I stared at them, feeling a wave of indignation rising inside. "And Noah? Does he too think his mother shouldn't see her granddaughter?" "Noah fully supports my decisions about raising Lillian," Pearl cut off, "and he agrees that at your age there is a risk of carrying infections." At my age, as if 75 was a leprosy that could infect an infant. "You can't keep me at a distance forever," I said quietly. "She's my granddaughter, and I have a right to be a part of her life." "No one has a right to someone else's child," Pearl parried. "And now you're just confirming why I don't want you around Lillian. You're too emotional and intrusive." They walked away, leaving me standing alone at the entrance to the park. People passing by looked at me with curiosity or pity. The news that Grandma was being kept away from her granddaughter must have spread through Ardencroft by now. That evening, I called Noah. This time he picked up. "Why, Noah?" I asked without preamble. "Why do you let them push me away?" He sighed. "Mom, it's not that simple." Pearl is very anxious as a mother. She's afraid of everything: germs, injuries, other people's influence. And I'm a stranger? No, of course not. But there was no certainty in his voice. Just give us time. When Lillian's older, things will be easier. When? I insisted. A year? 2? 10 years? I might not live to see it by then, Noah. Don't be dramatic, Mom. His tone became irritated. You look fine for your years. And anyway, Pearl says such attachment to grandchildren is a sign of an unhealthy addiction. I remained silent, stunned by his words. My son, my Noah, who had once been the most sensitive and kind boy, was now speaking to me in the language of the psychological pamphlets Pearl must have slipped him. So that's what you think, I finally said, that my desire to meet my granddaughter is pathological. I didn't say that, he defended himself, but you have to respect our boundaries as parents. And you have to respect me as your mother and Lillian's grandmother. I couldn't contain my anger anymore. Noah, what happened to you? When did you become so cold? I'm not cold. I just grew up. I have my own family now, my own responsibilities. And I'm not part of your family anymore? He was silent, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. You know what, Noah? My voice sounded calm, but a storm was raging inside. I'm tired of this. Tired of feeling unwanted. I'll stop imposing on you. If you want your daughter to know her grandmother, you know where to find me. I hung up the phone and sat at the window for a long time, looking out at the street where the evening lights were turning on. In that moment, I realized that I had lost my son. Not all at once, not in one day, but gradually, piece by piece, with each time he chose Pearl and her family over me. A few days later, a text came from Noah. Mom, I'm sorry about our conversation. I'll try to talk to Pearl about seeing Lillian, but that promise remained unfulfilled. Spring in Ardencroft always brought a revival. It was as if the whole town was waking up from its winter hibernation. Summer cafes opened. Street musicians appeared in the park, and local artists displayed their paintings on the sidewalks. I usually loved this time of year, but now that Lillian was 9 months old, the joy of spring was passing me by. Every morning I opened the store, served customers, smiled, and made small talk, even though an emptiness was growing inside me. I continued to call Noah every week, but the conversations grew shorter and more formal. He spoke sparingly about Lillian, growing up, doing well, starting to crawl. No stories, no details. It was as if he was afraid I'd learned too much about my granddaughter. One April day, sunny, with a light breeze bringing the smell of cherry blossoms, the bell above the store door announced a visitor. I looked up from the inventory book and saw Iris Flannery, the owner of the flower store across the street. Elizabeth, what a lovely day, isn't it? Iris was the kind of person who always sounded like she just won the lottery. Just came by to say hello and show you the sketches I've prepared for the church decorations. Church decorations? I interjected, not sure what she was talking about. Yes, for the christening. The Huntington family always orders flowers from me for important occasions, and I want it to be especially beautiful this time. Iris spread a sheet of paper with floral sketches on the counter. Lilies and roses are a classic combination for a christening, but I added some freesias for flavor and visual interest. My heart skipped a beat. Lillian's christening? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Iris raised a surprised look at me. Of course. Next Sunday, at St. Michael's Church. I thought you knew. After all, you're a grandmother. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yes, of course I am. It's just the date slipped my mind. You know, at my age, my memory isn't what it used to be. Oh, don't worry. Iris patted my arm. My Henry forgets things too, and he's only 68. I've already made a guest list for seating. The Huntington family, their friends, Pearl's colleagues from the gallery. Quite an event. Every word she said was like a knife stab. My granddaughter's christening, and I'm not even invited. The sketches are beautiful, I said, handing her back the sheet. I'm sure it will be very beautiful. Thank you, dear. Well, I've got to run. So many orders before the weekend. Iris scurried off, leaving me alone with a painful discovery. I closed the store earlier than usual. I went up to my apartment and sat by the phone, staring at it like an enemy. Should I call or not? Should I just pretend I didn't know anything? But something inside me, proudness, dignity, or just a desire to hear the truth from my own son's mouth, made me dial his number. Noah answered after the third dial tone. Voices and clinking dishes could be heard in the background. It sounded like they had guests. Mom? What's wrong? There was concern in his voice, as if I could only call in case of an emergency. Nothing's wrong, Noah. Just wanted to find out about Lillian's christening this Sunday. There was a pause, and I could almost physically feel him tense up. How did you find out? He finally asked. Does it matter? It's a small town. People talk. I tried to speak calmly, even though everything was boiling inside. Why didn't you tell me? He sighed, and I heard him move farther away from the guests. His footsteps, the sound of the door closing. Mom, listen. We planned a small ceremony, just for the closest people. And I'm not part of that circle. I'm Lillian's grandmother, Noah. It's hard to explain over the phone. Pearl is very anxious for the ceremony to go perfectly. Important people will be there. Her boss from the gallery, some of her father's clients. Am I going to ruin the painting? Embarrass you with my presence? That's not what I meant. His voice became irritated. It's just that Pearl wants it to be a certain way. You know what she's like. No, Noah, I don't know what she's like. You won't even let me go near her or your daughter. I took a deep breath. Look, I'm not asking for a front row seat. I can just be present quietly, in the last row. In the background, I heard a woman's voice, harsh, questioning. Then footsteps and the sound of a door opening. Noah, what's going on? The guests are asking where you've disappeared to. Pearl's voice sounded annoyed. It's my mother, Noah answered muffled, but I heard it anyway. She found out about the christening. A pause followed, then the sound of someone picking up the phone. Elizabeth? It was Pearl, her voice sounding cold and reserved. Look, now is not a good time for this conversation. We have guests. Noah's parents have flown in especially to prepare for the ceremony. Noah's parents. She spoke of me in the third person, like I was an outsider. Pearl, I'm his mother, I said calmly, and Lillian's grandmother. Why am I learning about the christening from outsiders? We were going to let you know later. Her voice sounded unconvinced. It's a family event, and we wanted to keep it intimate. Family? I could no longer contain my bitterness. And that's why colleagues from the gallery and your father's clients will be there? It's more like a networking event than a spiritual ceremony. You don't understand. Pearl shifted to a whisper, but there was steel ringing in her voice. Christenings are an important social event in our circle. People pay attention to every detail. And Noah, he's finally starting to fit into our society. I don't want anything to get in the way of that. Something or someone? I understood what she was getting at. Tell it straight, Pearl. You're ashamed of me. The old woman at the antique store who doesn't know which fork to use for her salad. A noise was heard in the background. Voices were coming closer. Honey, where are you and Noah? Everyone's waiting for the toast. It was Vivian's voice. Who are you talking to? Just a second, Mother, shouted Pearl, then back into the receiver, already quieter. Elizabeth, we'll talk about this later. Now is not the time. I heard the phone change hands again. Mom? It was Noah again, his voice sounding strained. I have to go. Pearl and I will discuss it and get back to you. Noah, I just want to know the truth. Am I invited to my granddaughter's christening or not? There was a loud question in the background. Someone from the guests appeared to have gotten quite close. What's going on? Is there a problem? And then something happened that I never expected from my son. His voice, usually calm and soft, suddenly exploded into the receiver. You are not invited to your granddaughter's christening. How many times do I have to tell you? Why can't you just accept it and leave us alone? There was a deafening silence. I could almost see everyone in the room frozen in shock at his outburst. Then there was muffled laughter and someone's comment that I couldn't make out. Mom, Noah began, his voice quiet again, but I wasn't listening anymore. It's okay, son, I said, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. I've got my answer. I won't bother you anymore. I hung up the phone and sat for a long time, looking out the window at springtime Ardencroft, the town where my whole life had been spent, where I'd raised a son who was now ashamed of me. The pain was so acute it turned into a physical sensation, a heaviness in my chest, a lump in my throat, a throbbing in my temples. I didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come for some reason. Instead, something cold and hard was growing inside, a determination I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, I didn't open the store. Instead, I called my old acquaintance Terrence Clark, the best real estate attorney in Ardencroft. Terrence, I need your help, I said when he answered. I want to sell the house on Oak Street. The one your son lives in? He wondered. Elizabeth, are you sure? Absolutely, and I want it done quickly and quietly. Terrence was silent. We'd known each other for nearly 40 years. He'd bought antique clocks from me for his office, and I'd consulted with him on legal matters. Lizzie, what's wrong? He asked at last. It's a long story, Terry. Let's just say I decided to finally get my affairs in order. The house is titled in my name. I pay the taxes and insurance. I have the right to sell it, don't I? Legally, yes, absolutely, he answered cautiously. But your family lives there. Noah, his wife, the baby, they have the money to buy another house or get Pearl's parents to help. They're so wealthy and caring after all. I realized the bitterness in my voice, but I couldn't control it. Okay, Terrence said after a pause. I'll prepare all the necessary paperwork. But by law, we have to notify the current tenants of the sale. Have you talked to Noah about that yet? No, and I'd prefer he find out officially from the notice Elizabeth. Terrence sighed. It would create tension. Maybe we should talk to him first. Terrence, I've made all his decisions for almost 50 years. Now I'm making mine. Please just get the paperwork ready. After talking to the lawyer, I decided to take a walk. The day was clear with a slight breeze. Perfect weather for thinking. I walked down familiar streets, past houses whose stories I knew by heart, past people I'd met all my life. Some said hello, others averted their eyes. The news that I wasn't invited to my granddaughter's christening must have spread through the city. My feet led me to St. Michael's Church, a whitewashed building with stained glass windows that shone in the sunlight. This is where I had baptized Noah. It was also where Lillian's christening would take place next Sunday. Without me, I went inside. The church was empty, with only old Pastor Higgins wiping down the pulpit. He turned at the sound of my footsteps and smiled. Elizabeth? What a pleasant surprise. I had known Pastor Higgins for over 30 years. He had baptized Noah and before that had conducted Robert's funeral. He was well into his 80s, but he was still serving, though the main duties had already passed to his young assistant. Hello, Pastor. I stepped closer. Getting ready for Sunday service? Yes, and for your granddaughter's christening. He looked at me carefully. I've heard. Talk. Is it true you weren't invited? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Pastor Higgins shook his head. That's sad. When I baptized your Noah, you were glowing with pride. And now, after all these years, times change, Pastor. People do too. Yes, but some values must remain the same. Respect for parents is one of them. He placed his wrinkled hand on mine. If you want, I could talk to them. No, thanks. I shook my head. That would only make things worse. I've made their decision. And mine too, I added mentally. I left the church with a heavy heart, but with even more determination. Back home, I spent the rest of the day going through old photo albums. Noah the baby, Noah the first grader, Noah the senior. So many memories, so much love invested in this boy who now shamed me in front of his wife's family. Friday morning, Terrence brought the paperwork. The official notice to sell the house was written in dry legal language. No emotion, just facts and deadlines. By law, they have 30 days to vacate the premises after receiving the notice, Terrence explained, but you can give them more time if you want. 30 days is plenty, I replied. When will you give them the notice? I can send it by courier today. Or do you want to do it in person? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to see the look on Noah's face when he got the news. But the other part, the wiser, calmer part, realized it would only increase the conflict. Send it by courier, I decided, but not today. On Sunday, after the church service. On the day of the christening. Terrence raised his eyebrows. Elizabeth, are you sure? It might seem deliberately cruel. It is, Terry. I looked him straight in the eye. I want them to get a notice instead of a gift from me. Let them know there are consequences for their actions. Terrence sighed but didn't argue. Fine. I'll arrange a delivery for Sunday afternoon. The night before the christening, I hardly slept at all. I was plagued by doubts. Was I doing the right thing? Was it too cruel? But then I remembered Noah's voice shouting into the telephone receiver, "You're not invited to your granddaughter's christening." And my resolve returned. Sunday morning, I didn't go to church. I didn't want to sit at home wondering how the ceremony was going, so I decided to go for a long walk outside of town. The day was warm, and the May air smelled of flowers and freshly cut grass. I walked along the country road past fields and small farms, trying to clear my head of thoughts of what was going on at St. Michael's. I didn't get back until evening, tired physically but with a clear head. I checked my phone, no calls, no messages. So the notice had been delivered, and they were still digesting the news. I made myself some tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city falling asleep. The phone rang when the streetlights were already on. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. Yes, Noah? I said, answering the call. What does that mean? His voice shook with rage. Notice of sale? Eviction in 30 days? Are you out of your mind? No, son. I'm just making a business decision. The house is all mine. I have the right to dispose of it. A business decision? Mom, your family lives here. Your granddaughter. Oh, so now I'm part of the family again? And just yesterday, I wasn't good enough to attend a christening. This is completely different. You're trying to punish us for not letting me see my granddaughter for months? For yelling at me in front of your rich guests? For being ashamed of me, Noah? Silence hung on the other end of the line. It's Pearl, he finally said quietly. She has her own ideas about what our family should look like. And in those ideas, there's no room for your mother. I finished for him. I see. But in that case, there's no reason why I should provide a place for you to live. Mom, please. His voice softened, became almost pleading. We've just done some remodeling. Lillian has her own room with paintings on the walls. Where are we going to go? With your income and the support of the Huntington family, I'm sure you'll find suitable accommodations, maybe even better than this one. You can't do that. I can, Noah, and I'm doing it. Consider it my christening present to Lillian. He swore the first time he'd ever spoken to me. Pearl was right about you. His voice became hard again. You're a selfish, vindictive old woman. It's a good thing we didn't let you anywhere near Lillian. She doesn't need that kind of influence. His words hurt, but I didn't put on a show. I'll see you in court if you decide to contest the eviction. But I'm warning you, all the paperwork is in order. The house is mine, and always has been. You'll regret it, he threw in. When you're all alone, with no family, no grandchildren, you'll regret it. I'm already alone, Noah. You made that choice for both of us when you decided I wasn't good enough for your new life. I hung up the phone, feeling strangely calm. It had all been decided. The house would be sold, the money would go into my retirement fund, and Noah and Pearl would let them build their lives on their own, without my help or interference. Before I could put the phone away, it rang again. This time it was Pearl. How could you? Her voice was ringing with indignation. On the day of the christening, you've ruined everything. Hello, Pearl, I said calmly, almost kindly. I'm glad to hear that my message reached you. Message? You called it a message? You're throwing us out on the street. We have a child. You have 30 days to find a new place to live. With your connections and finances, that shouldn't be a problem. My parents are furious. They thought you gave this house to Noah. I never said that, I replied firmly. The house was always deeded to me, and I paid all the bills on it. It was a favor on my part that you took for granted. We'll sue, Pearl threatened. My father knows the best lawyers in the state. Please, but I warn you, it will only prolong the process and make it more public. Do you really need a scandal in your impeccable social circle? Pearl was silent, and I could feel her calculating her options. You're doing this out of revenge, she finally said, because we didn't invite you to the christening. No, Pearl. I'm doing this because I finally realized I'm no longer a member of your family. And since that's the case, there's no reason why I should provide you with a roof over your head. Noah's right. You are a cruel, vindictive woman. Perhaps. But I'm a woman with a house that will soon be sold. And you're a young family that needs to find a new place to live. 30 days, Pearl, not a day more. I ended the conversation feeling a strange mixture of emotions, bitter and relief, pain and determination. The deed was done. The bridges had been burned. A new path lay ahead. What kind of path, I didn't know yet, but it would be mine, mine alone, without the ungrateful son and his arrogant wife. 3 days after sending the notice passed in oppressive silence. No calls, no visits, as if my son's family was deciding what tactics to choose in the fight with me. I continued to work in the store, serving customers, but a strange feeling swirled inside me, a mixture of anxiety and release. For the first time in years, I made a decision to think only of myself, not to put Noah and his well-being at the center of the universe. On the fourth day, the bell above the store door jingled, and I looked up from the antique silver teapot I was polishing. Noah stood on the doorstep, pale, eyes red from lack of sleep, but dressed impeccably, in the suit I'd seen in the christening photos. Mom, he nodded, closing the door behind him. Noah, I set the teapot and napkin aside. What a surprise! He strode into the back of the store, looking around as if he hadn't been here in years, which, however, he had been. We need to talk, he said, stopping at the counter. Sure, tea? No thanks. I won't be long. I nodded and stepped out from behind the counter, pointing to a small seating area in the corner of the store, 2 chairs and a table where I usually chatted with important customers. Have a seat. We sat down across from each other. Noah looked tense, back straight, hands folded in his lap as if he were in a job interview. Mom, you have to withdraw the notice, he began without preamble. I have to? I raised an eyebrow. Interesting choice of words. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose, a gesture he'd inherited from his father. Please, you need to understand the position you're putting us in. Explain. I leaned back in my chair, looking intently at my son. We have a baby. We just finished renovating the nursery. Pearl set up a studio on the second floor. All our stuff, our life, is in this house. He was quiet. And then 30 days is unrealistic. Even if we start looking for a new place to live right now, we won't have time to find something suitable, organize the move the furniture. You could store things in a storage unit until you find something suitable, I suggested, or rent temporary housing. Noah looked at me as if he didn't recognize me. Is that really what you want to do? Throw your own son and granddaughter out on the street? Don't be dramatic. I repeated the same words he'd told me once before. You have a steady income, savings, the support of the Pearl family. You won't end up on the street. It's not just about the money. This house is part of our lives, our history. Our history? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. Noah, you've been erasing me from your life for years, ignored me, pushed me away, hid your daughter, and now you're talking about our shared history? He lowered his eyes. I know I made mistakes. Mistakes? I shook my head. Noah, you yelled at me in front of your rich friends. You didn't even invite me to your own daughter's christening. Those aren't mistakes. They're conscious decisions. I succumbed to pressure. He looked up at me with a look full of genuine regret. Pearl, her parents, they have certain expectations. I wanted to conform. At the expense of your own mother. I know what I did was wrong. He reached out and took my hand, and I apologize for it. I really do, Mom. I've been a terrible son lately. His touch, his gaze, it all reminded me of Noah Boy who used to come to me when he made a mistake, with the same expression of sincere remorse. Part of me wanted to forgive, to forget, to go back to the way things were. Noah, I gently released my hand. I appreciate your apology, but what would change if I withdrew the notice? Pearl still doesn't want me around Lillian. Her parents still don't think I'm good enough, and you'll be torn between us until you choose their side again. Things will be different, he insisted. I talked to Pearl. She agreed that we were being unfair. We could start small, weekly visits so you could see Lillian. Weekly visits? I shook my head. How generous of you to let a grandmother see her granddaughter once a week, supervised as if I were some kind of threat. Noah sighed. Mom, please, I'm trying to find a compromise. Compromise would have been appropriate when you first refused to let me see Lillian. It's too late for that now. So you're willing to destroy our family over a grudge? No, Noah. I looked him straight in the eye. I'm ready to stop letting you and Pearl use me when it's convenient and push me away when I become a liability. The house is mine. I've decided to sell it. It's a business decision. He stood up abruptly, his face contorted with anger. You're lying to yourself. It's not a business decision, it's revenge. You want to punish us for not living the way you want us to live. I stood up too, keeping my composure. Call it whatever you want. My decision won't change. He grabbed a business card holder off the table and threw it against the wall. The antique silver object hit the bookshelf and fell to the floor. I flinched, but didn't back away. It was a gift from your father, I said quietly. He wouldn't approve of this behavior. Noah was breathing heavily, his face turning purple. Don't you dare use your father's memory. You've always done it when you wanted to manipulate me. I never manipulated you, Noah. I loved you and did everything I could to make you happy. If you really wanted my happiness, you wouldn't be doing this now. I'm not responsible for your happiness anymore, I said firmly. You're a grown man. You have a wife, a child, a career. Your happiness is in your hands. He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head. I don't recognize you, he said finally. My mother was never so cruel. And my son was never ashamed of me, I parried. Apparently, we've both changed. He turned and walked quickly out of the store, slamming the door so that the bell above it rang long after he was gone. I picked up the business card holder from the floor, inspecting it for damage. A small dent on the corner, nothing that couldn't be fixed. If only the relationship with my son could be repaired as easily. The next visit came 2 days later. This time Pearl came, elegant as always, wearing an immaculate pale blue suit and pearl earrings, but with a tense face. Elizabeth, she nodded, stopping at the counter. Pearl, I replied with the same nod. To what do I owe the pleasure? I came to talk about the house situation. She looked around the store with mild disdain. Could we discuss this in a more private setting? I pointed to the door leading to the back room. Please. We walked into a small room that served as my office and lounge at the same time. There was an antique oak desk, 2 armchairs, and a small couch, a filing cabinet, and bookshelves stocked with specialized antiques literature. Pearl sat down in a chair, placing a dainty purse on her lap. Elizabeth, I understand your frustration, she began in a businesslike tone. Noah and I really haven't always gotten our relationship with you right, but eviction is too drastic a measure. This isn't an eviction, Pearl. It's the sale of my property. Semantics, she waved it away. The point is, you're forcing us to rush to find a new place to live, which puts stress on the whole family, including Lillian. Lillian will adapt, I said. Children are much more resistant to change than adults. Pearl squinted. You sound like you know my daughter. But after all, you've only spent a few minutes with her in her entire year of life. I felt a wave of anger rising inside, but held back. And whose fault is that, Pearl? She pressed her lips together. Look, I didn't come to fight. I came to offer a compromise. I'm listening. We want to buy the house, she said bluntly. Name your price. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. You want to buy a house that just a few years ago you couldn't even renovate without my help? Things have changed. Pearl straightened her back. My gallery is thriving. Noah got a promotion in college. And of course, my parents are willing to help with the down payment. How convenient. I couldn't contain my sarcasm. What about my presence in Lillian's life? Will that change too? Pearl faltered. We could set up a visitation schedule. Perhaps start with once a week, supervised, and then as Lillian gets used to you. Supervised, I repeated slowly, like I'm some kind of threat to the baby. Not a threat, Pearl corrected quickly. It's just that Lillian doesn't know you. She needs time to adjust. And whose fault is that? I asked again. Pearl sighed. Elizabeth, I'm trying to find a solution that will suit everyone. We're willing to pay market value for the house and gradually include you in Lillian's life. And if I refuse your generous offer? What then? She tensed. Then we will have to resort to other methods. What methods? My father has already consulted lawyers. We can challenge the sale, citing a verbal agreement between you and Noah that the house was in fact a gift to him. There was no agreement, I objected. I've always made it clear that the house remains mine. Word against word, Pearl shrugged. And we have witnesses who can confirm that you referred to the house as Noah's house more than once, saying you bought it for him. It's manipulation and you know it. It's business, Elizabeth. She smiled coldly. You yourself called your decision a business decision, didn't you? Now, in business, one uses every tool available to accomplish one's goals. I studied the woman in front of me, elegant, confident, calculating. So unlike me. No wonder Noah had chosen her and her world over me and mine. I will defend my family by any means necessary, Pearl continued, seeing my silence. If it takes a legal battle, there will be a legal battle. If it takes a public scandal, there will be a scandal. Is that what you want? Threats, Pearl? Is that your way of dealing with conflict? Not threats, but informing you of the possible consequences. She adjusted her pearl earring. Think about how it looks from the outside. An elderly woman evicting her only son, his wife, and young child from the house they've always considered their home. Whose side do you think public opinion would be on? I felt my heart clench at her words. She was right. From the outside, I looked like a vindictive old woman. But I also knew the truth was more complicated than that. Pearl, I said after a pause, I appreciate your candor, but I'm not going to blackmail myself with public opinion or threats of lawsuits. The house is mine. All the paperwork is in order. I've decided to sell it. It's my right, and it's our right to fight that decision. Of course, I nodded. But think about it. Is a long legal battle, public accusations, and family secrets put out in the open really what you want? Especially given your position in society. Pearl tensed. What do you mean? Only that scandals tend to hurt those in high places more, I said calmly but firmly. Imagine the headlines. Family of famous Huntington jewelers squeezes old lady out of her own home. How would that affect your father's business? She went pale, and I realized I'd hit the mark. You're bluffing, she said finally. You're not going to the press. I didn't say I would, I shrugged, but court cases are public records. And in a small town like ours, news travels fast, especially juicy news about the rich and successful. Pearl was silent, clearly calculating her options. Here's what I propose, I said finally. I'm not changing my mind about selling the house, but I can extend the eviction period to 60 days instead of 30. That should be enough time to find a new place to live without rushing. Not enough, Pearl retorted. We want to buy a house. This is our house. No, Pearl. It's my house that I've been letting you use, and I don't want to sell it to you. Why? Just out of revenge? Call it whatever you want. I've made up my mind. June in Ardencroft was sweltering. The sun scorched the town mercilessly, turning the asphalt into a frying pan, and the river on the outskirts brought a welcome coolness. But the real heat was around the house on Oak Street, my house, which I had decided to sell despite the protests of my son and his wife. Terrence Clark, my lawyer and old friend, was right. The Huntington family's threats remained threats. Ethan Huntington, perhaps for the first time in his life, faced a situation where his money and connections could not change an uncomfortable reality. All the paperwork on the house was in impeccable order. No written agreements existed to transfer the house to Noah, and verbal promises, even if there had been any, which there weren't, were unenforceable. They filed in court, Terrence informed me, when we met in his office in the early days of June. But Judge Montgomery denied their motion to stay the sale. The house is yours, Lizzie, and you have every right to sell it. And their argument that I allegedly promised this house to Noah? I asked, looking at the court documents. A weak position. Terrence shrugged. They have no witnesses other than themselves and Pearl's parents. Everyone else they've tried to bring in has refused to perjure themselves. I nodded, feeling both relieved and bitter at the same time. Bitterness that my own son was willing to lie in court to get the house he thought was rightfully his, even though he'd never paid a dime for it. So, can I proceed with the sale process? I asked, handing the paperwork back to Terrence. Absolutely. I've already contacted Realtor Martha King. She's ready to take the house to work as soon as tomorrow. Martha, an energetic middle-aged woman with a reputation as a real estate shark, wasted no time. The very next day she came to view the house. I handed her the keys and we went to Oak Street together. Pearl met us at the door, cold and aloof, but impeccably polite as always. "Mrs. Wolfe, Miss King?" She nodded, letting us inside. "Welcome." The house had changed since I'd last been here. The walls in the living room, which used to be a soft yellow color, now shone a spotless white. The antique lamps I'd collected over the years were gone, giving way to modern chrome and glass fixtures. The furniture was simple, minimalist, without a hint of antiques. "What a beautiful house," Martha marveled, making notes in her clipboard. "Great layout, lots of light. And the renovations are recent, I see." "We completely revamped the interior last year," Pearl replied, and I noticed how she emphasized the word we. New electrical wiring, modern plumbing, and warm floors in the bathrooms. "Impressive," Martha nodded. "It adds considerably to the value of the property." We continued our tour, moving from room to room. On the second floor, Pearl showed us Lillian's room, spacious with paintings on the walls, a fairy forest with deer and fairies. "It's handmade," she said with a note of pride. "A friend of mine at the gallery painted it. Cost a fortune." I stared at the painting, thinking about how I'd never seen Lillian play in this beautiful room, never read her a bedtime story, or covered her with a blanket, or kissed her goodnight. All of these simple joys of grandmotherhood were stolen from me because of Pearl's arrogance and Noah's weakness. The last room was Pearl's studio, a former guest bedroom converted into a bright room with large windows, perfect lighting, and plenty of shelves for artifacts and books. "This is where I work on catalogs for the gallery," Pearl explained. "The space is perfect for taking photos and evaluating exhibits." When the tour was complete, Martha was pleased. "This is a great facility, Elizabeth. With the current state of the market and with all the improvements your son's family has made, we can bid it well above the original appraisal." Pearl, standing nearby, visibly tensed. "I hope you will consider our investment in the house when determining our compensation," she said, looking at me. "Compensation?" I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "Of course, we've invested heavily in repairs and upgrades. That has increased the value of the house, as Ms. King just confirmed." I looked at Martha, who delicately took a step back, giving us space for this obviously uncomfortable conversation. "Pearl," I said calmly, "you've lived in this house rent-free for almost 5 years. I've paid taxes, insurance, and I've never asked you for rent. Consider the renovations your investment in living comfortably all those years." Her face went pale with anger, but she held back. Probably didn't want to make a scene in front of a stranger. "We'll discuss it with our lawyers," she finally said. "Of course," I nodded. "In the meantime, don't forget that the eviction deadline expires in 20 days. Martha and I left the house, leaving Pearl with tightly compressed lips and a murderous look. "She makes a strong impression," Martha remarked as we got into her car. "That's putting it mildly," I sighed. "Pearl Huntington is used to getting what she wants. But not this time. Martha proved to be an effective agent. Within a week, we had 3 potential buyers offering above market value. One of them, Dr. Everett Priestley, a new surgeon at City Hospital, was particularly interested. He just moved to Ardencroft with his wife and 3 children," Martha told me. "They're renting an apartment, but they're looking for a permanent place to live." Dr. Priestley fell in love with the house at first sight. "Even though there are still people living there?" I asked. "That hasn't deterred him. He understands the situation and is willing to wait until the house is vacant." 2 days later, Martha and I met with Dr. Priestley in her office to sign the preliminary contract. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a soft smile. His wife, Rachel, a petite woman with lively eyes, immediately endeared herself to me with her sincerity. "We are so grateful to you, Mrs. Wolfe," she said, shaking my hand. "The house is just perfect for us. The children have already picked out their rooms. I'm glad the house will go to a good family," I replied sincerely. When all the papers were signed, I felt strangely relieved. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. The house I had bought for Noah, which I had never really lived in, would soon be home to another family, perhaps a happier family than ours. That evening of the same day, I broke the news to Helen. We sat on her veranda, sipping lemonade and watching the sun slowly sink below the horizon. "So, you did it," Helen smiled. "I'm proud of you, Lizzie." "Sometimes I wonder if I'm making a mistake," I admitted. "Maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe I should have given them another chance." Helen shook her head. "How many chances have you given Noah before?" "Dozens, hundreds, and every time he chose Pearl and her family over you." She took my hand. "You have a right to self-respect, Lizzie. You have the right not to be a doormat that people wipe their feet on." Her words warmed my soul. Helen had been my rock during those difficult months. When the whole town was whispering about the Wolf family scandal, she stood by my side, never doubting my decision for a moment. "Do you think they've started looking for a new place to live yet?" I asked. "I'm sure they have." Helen nodded. "The Huntingtons are too proud to risk being on the street. Ethan's probably already looking for something for them in his neighborhood." I wondered about that. Maybe this would be best for everyone? Noah and Pearl would live among people in their own neighborhood, and I could finally be free of the illusions of a family idol that never existed. My thoughts were interrupted by the phone ringing. Noah's number. I hesitated for a second, but answered anyway. "Yes, Noah?" "Mom?" His voice sounded strangely strained. "I just found out you've already found a buyer for the house." "Yes, I did. And you weren't going to tell me about it?" "Noah, you knew the house was for sale. What did you expect?" He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "We found a new house in the West Hills neighborhood." West Hills was Ardencroft's most upscale neighborhood, where mostly wealthy families like the Huntingtons lived. "That's good." I didn't know what else to say. "I'm glad you solved the housing issue so quickly." Pearl's parents helped with the mortgage. I could hear a strange mixture of pride and shame in his voice. "The house is bigger than we need, but Pearl will have a spacious studio, and Lillian will have her own playroom." "Sounds wonderful." We both fell silent, not knowing how to continue this awkward conversation. "Mom," Noah finally said, "I know I've messed up a lot of things. I haven't been a good son lately." "Noah, no, let me finish," he interrupted. "I'm not asking you to cancel the sale. I realize I've gone too far, but I want you to know I'm sorry about the way things turned out." His words sounded sincere, but I'd heard similar apologies before. Noah had always been a master of beautiful words that were rarely backed up by actions. "I appreciate your words," I said carefully. "But apologizing is just the beginning, Noah. We have a long way to go if we're going to rebuild any semblance of a relationship." "I know," he was quiet. "Pearl and I have talked about it. She agrees that we've been unfair to you, especially on the Lillian issue. So now what? We'd like to take you out to dinner, to our new home when we move in, so you can get to know Lillian for real." I closed my eyes, imagining that dinner, the strained smiles, the awkward pauses, Pearl watching my every move, ready to intervene at the slightest violation of her rules. "Let's get through the move first," I finally said, "and then we'll decide how to move on." "Okay," he sounded relieved. "Thanks, Mom." After the conversation, I sat for a long time, staring at the sunset. Helen waited silently for me to digest what I had heard. They found a new home, I said finally. In West Hills. Pearl's parents helped with the mortgage. Not surprising. Helen nodded. Ethan Huntington would never let his daughter live in anything less than a mansion. Noah apologized, said he and Pearl discussed the situation and admit they were unfair to me. And you believe them? Helen looked at me carefully. I hesitated for a moment. I don't. Part of me wants to believe Noah is sincere, but the other part remembers all the previous promises that ended in nothing. People don't change that quickly, Lizzie. Helen shook her head. Especially Pearl. She may say the right things, but that doesn't mean she's really changed her attitude toward you. I know, I sighed, but they invited me to dinner at the new house, so I could meet Lillian. And what did you say? That we'd get back to it after they moved in. Helen smiled. A wise decision. Give them time to settle in, and yourself time to think. Don't be in a hurry to forgive just because they finally realized they lost the battle for the house. I nodded, realizing my friend was right. Too often, I'd rushed to Noah's side at the first sign of remorse. Forgiven too easily, forgotten too quickly. But not this time. This time I would proceed slowly, carefully, protecting my heart from more disappointments. The next 2 weeks passed in strange suspense. I continued to work at the store, but my thoughts kept returning to the Oak Street house and its residents. Martha reported that Noah and Pearl had begun packing in preparation for the move. Dr. Priestley and his family were looking forward to moving into their new home. One morning as I was opening the store, Noah's familiar Volvo pulled up to the door. He got out of the car carrying a large cardboard box. "Hi, Mom," he said, stepping inside. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure," I pointed to the box. "What's this?" "Stuff you left at the house." He set the box on the counter. Photo albums, some books, some papers from the study. "I thought you might want to keep them." I peered into the box. On top was an old photo album with a worn leather cover, the same one that held pictures of Noah the baby, his first steps, his first day of school. The album had been on a shelf in the guest bedroom that Pearl had turned into her studio all those years ago. "Thank you." I pulled out the album, flipping through the pages. "I thought this stuff had been thrown out a long time ago." "No, of course not." Noah shook his head. "I would never throw away our family heirlooms." Our family heirlooms. It was strange to hear those words from a son who not so long ago had shamed me in front of his rich friends. That evening, I spent a long time going through the contents of the box. Old photographs, letters, Noah's childhood drawings. Each thing was steeped in memories, each telling the story of our little family. A story that was now coming to an end. I called Helen and told her about Noah's visit and the box of memories. "You know," I said, holding up a picture of 10-year-old Noah on his bike, "I'm starting to realize how toxic our relationship has been all these years. Not just after Pearl came along, but before that." "What do you mean?" Helen asked. "I've been giving Noah everything, time, money, energy, gave up my own desires so he could have the best, and he took it for granted," I sighed. "It's not that he was an ungrateful child. It's just, I never taught him the value of sacrifice, never set boundaries, and the result is a grown man who thinks the whole world should revolve around him and his comfort." "There's some truth to that," Helen agreed. "But don't be too hard on yourself. You did the best you could under the circumstances you had." "Maybe," I set the photograph aside. "But I realize now that I deserve more than that. Deserve respect, recognition, care. And if Noah can't or won't give me that, I have to find those things in other aspects of life." "Exactly," Helen hummed approvingly. "And you started out right by asserting your rights to your own property. On moving day, I deliberately spent the entire day away from Oak Street. I didn't want to accidentally run into the procession of trucks and the hustle and bustle of the move. Instead, Helen and I went to a neighboring town to an antique fair where I found some interesting items for the store. Returning in the evening, I still couldn't resist driving by the house. The windows were dark, the yard empty. Only a forgotten childhood toy, a small plush rabbit, lay on the porch steps, like a silent reminder of a family that no longer lived here. I picked up the toy, examining it in the light of the street lamp. A soft rabbit with a worn ear and a sewn-on patch on its side, clearly a favorite toy that had been cradled somewhere, that had fallen asleep with. I imagined Lillian looking for her rabbit, crying for it, and my heart sank. Pulling out my phone, I dialed Noah's number. "Mom," he answered almost immediately, his voice sounding tired. "Hi, Noah. I was driving by the house and found a stuffed rabbit on the porch. I think it belongs to Lillian." "Oh my God, Hoppy Rabbit!" Noah exclaimed. "She's been crying for him for an hour. We turned the whole new house upside down, thinking we'd lost him when we moved in. He must have fallen out when we went out." "I can bring it to you," I offered, "if you give me a new address." He was quiet for a second, then said, "That would be wonderful, Mom." "Thank you." He dictated an address in West Hills, and I headed there, keeping the tattered rabbit in the passenger seat. It was an unplanned step toward me, but perhaps it was small gestures like this that could begin the healing process, if not a full restoration of the relationship, at least the establishment of new, healthier boundaries. Noah and Pearl's new home turned out to be exactly what I had envisioned. Large, modern, with a perfectly mowed lawn and designer landscaping, a house that screamed wealth and status to its occupants. I rang the doorbell, clutching the stuffed rabbit in my hand, and prepared to face a new reality, a reality in which I was no longer the central figure in my son's life, but could perhaps find my place on the periphery. The door opened and Noah stood on the doorstep, tired but with relief on his face at the sight of the toy in my hands. "Mommy, you're a lifesaver." He took the rabbit. "Lillian finally fell asleep, but she'll be so happy to see Hoppy in the morning." "I'm glad I could help," I smiled. "The new house looks impressive." "Do you want to come in?" he offered, and there was uncertainty in his voice. "Pearl's already laid up, but I can show you the first floor." I shook my head. "Not tonight, Noah. It's late, and I'm sure you're all tired after moving in." He nodded, and something resembling relief flashed in his gaze. "Maybe another time? When we've settled in a bit?" "Sure," I smiled. "Let me know when you're ready." We said our goodbyes, and I left, feeling strangely calm. Selling the house, which had started as an act of revenge, had turned into something more. The first step toward freeing myself from a toxic relationship and finding my own strength and dignity. As I drove back home, I thought about the new chapter of life ahead, where I would be the center of my own universe, not an eternally orbiting satellite around a planet called Noah. I didn't know if we could ever repair our relationship, but I was sure of one thing. I would no longer sacrifice myself for a man who didn't appreciate those sacrifices. A note from Martha was waiting for me at the store. Dr. Priestley wanted to inspect the house one more time before finalizing the purchase. Life went on, new doors opening and old doors closing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free of guilt, free of exorbitant expectations, free of the feeling that I wasn't good enough. I was ready for a new beginning. The money from the sale of the house arrived in my account in mid-July, an amount that seemed almost unreal. Dr. Priestley had paid even more than the original price. So much did he like the house. I sat in Terrence's office, looking at the check and trying to realize that I now had financial freedom that I could only dream of before. "What do you plan on doing with all that money, Lizzie?" Terrence asked, leaning back in his leather chair. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I never thought I'd have that amount. Some of it can be invested for a steady income for the future," he suggested. But with the rest, why not make yourself happy? You deserve it. Make yourself happy. Those words echoed in my head as I walked back to the store. When was the last time I'd done something purely for my own pleasure? Not for Noah, not for business, but just for myself. I told Helen about it that evening as we ate dinner at a little Italian restaurant on Maple Street. You know what I've always dreamed of? I asked, twirling spaghetti on my fork. About traveling to Europe. To visit London, Paris, Rome, to see the old castles and museums, the very places where the antiques I've been trading for 30 years were created. So, what's the problem? Helen raised her wine glass. You have the money, the time, and no strings attached. Go. At my age, alone, and why not? 75 isn't a judgment, Lizzie. You're in great shape, smart, and energetic. A lot of people our age are just starting to live for themselves. I wondered, really, what was stopping me? Noah is an adult. He has his own life. The store might close for a month or two. I won't go broke. And the dream of seeing the world that I'd been putting off for decades still lived inside me. You know, you're right, I nodded decisively. I'll go. But not alone. You're coming with me. Helen laughed. Yeah, but I have children, grandchildren, who will get along just fine without you for a couple of months. Come on, Helen. When else are we going to get a chance like this? Two old ladies conquering Europe sounds like the start of a great adventure, doesn't it? Her eyes lit up. Are you serious? Absolutely. I'll pay all expenses. Consider it my thanks for your support over the last few months. Helen hesitated only a moment, then smiled broadly. You know what? To hell with everything. I'm with you. We clinked glasses, cementing our spontaneous decision, and in that moment I felt more alive than I had in years. The following weeks passed in a pleasant flurry of activity. Helen and I planned the itinerary, booked hotels, chose excursions. I hired a temporary assistant to look after the store in my absence, a young art history student named Lori. She was thrilled to have the opportunity to work with real antiques, and her enthusiasm reminded me of myself as a young girl. Our itinerary began in London, then Paris, Amsterdam, Berlin, Vienna, Venice, Florence, and finally Rome. 2 months, 8 cities, countless museums, castles, cathedrals, antique stores, and auction houses. Just a dream that was finally becoming a reality. A week before I left, I decided to let Noah know my plans. We hadn't seen each other since I'd brought the stuffed rabbit to their new home, though we'd talked on the phone a few times, politely but distantly. I called him at the college office, knowing he'd be there alone, without Pearl. Noah Wolf here. His voice sounded official, like a man expecting a business call. Hello, Noah. It's Mom. Mom! The tone changed instantly. It's good to hear from you. How are you? Fine, thanks. Just calling to let you know I'm leaving for 2 months. Leaving? Where? To Europe. I've always dreamed of seeing European museums and antique markets. Helen Nightingale and I are leaving next Monday. A silence hung on the other end of the line. Noah? Are you still here? Yeah, here, he coughed. Just surprised. You never mentioned wanting to travel. A lot has changed in the last year, I replied softly, including me. Is it because of the money from selling the house? There was a note in his voice that I couldn't identify. Envy? Resentment? Partly, I admitted. Now I can afford the things I've always dreamed of. I see. He was quiet. What about the store? I hired a temporary assistant, a girl named Lori, very capable and loves antiques. And you trust her with your business? To a person you barely know? I sighed. Noah, I make decisions about my life and my business on my own. I just wanted to let you know my plans, not ask permission. Of course I'm sorry. He quickly backtracked. Just worried about you. Europe isn't Ardencroft. Different country, different language. They speak English in England, Noah. I couldn't resist the slight irony. And in the other countries, we'll have guides. Besides, I'm not a helpless old lady. I'm quite capable of taking care of myself. I know, he sighed. It's just, this is so sudden. You've always been here at Ardencroft, always available if you needed help or advice, and that was the whole point of our relationship, wasn't it? I'd always been available to him, always put his needs before my own, but not now. Now it was my time. Life is full of surprises, Noah, I said softly. I hope you can be happy for me. Of course, his voice sounded uncertain. I hope you have a good time. After the call, I wondered about Noah's reaction. He didn't seem happy for me, more concerned that I was out of his control, becoming unavailable. But that was no longer my problem. I was going to enjoy my journey without looking back. London greeted Helen and me with drizzle and a chill, typical English weather, even in August. But neither the rain nor the fatigue from the long flight could dampen our mood. We settled in a cozy hotel in the Bloomsbury district, not far from the British Museum, and the next day we set out to explore the city. The British Museum was exactly as I had envisioned it, grand, huge, and full of treasures from all over the world. We spent the whole day there, but had time to see only a small part of it. I was particularly impressed by the collection of antique silver, exquisite goblets, vases, jewelry created by craftsmen thousands of years ago. To think, I said to Helen, looking at a silver Roman goblet, I've been selling things like this for years, but I've never seen where they were made, never felt the atmosphere that surrounded them. Helen squeezed my hand. You can see it now, though. Better late than never, isn't it? In a London antique store, I met its owner, Oliver Radcliffe, a gray-haired gentleman about my age, with a sharp mind and an encyclopedic knowledge of English silver. He invited Helen and me to tea at his club, introduced us to other antique dealers, and showed us places not written about in tourist guides. He was easy and interesting to be with. No snobbery or arrogance, just a shared passion for beautiful antiques and their history. From London, we traveled to Paris, a city that immediately won my heart with its elegance and beauty. The Louvre, the Musée d'Orsay, the Saint Ouen flea market, each day brought new discoveries and impressions. Helen and I wandered the narrow streets of Montmartre, drank wine in small cafes, observed Parisian life, and felt ourselves not as tourists, but as part of this beautiful city. In Rome, the last stop on our trip, I received an unexpected phone call from Noah. Mom, is that you? His voice sounded strangely strained. Yes, Noah. What's wrong? Nothing. Just haven't heard from you in a while. How's your trip going? Fine, I smiled, watching the sunset over Rome from the terrace of our hotel. We're in Rome right now. We're coming home in 3 days. Great. He was quiet. Listen, Mom, I need to have a serious talk with you when you get back. About what? I was wary. It's hard to explain over the phone, especially with international fairs. He laughed nervously. Let's do it when you get back, okay? Sure, I agreed, though a strange uneasiness crept into my soul. I'll call you as soon as I'm home. I returned home a different person, tanned, rested, with a new outlook on life and a luggage full of souvenirs, antique finds, and, most importantly, experiences that no amount of money can buy. Lori did a wonderful job running the store in my absence, even boosting sales by organizing a small exhibition of the English porcelain I had collected over the years. Her enthusiasm and fresh eyes were exactly what the business needed, and I offered her a permanent position, working 3 days a week while she studied. The next day, I called Noah as promised. We agreed to meet at Martha's Cafe, a neutral location where we had once dined together often when Noah was a teenager. He was already waiting for me at a corner table, tapping his fingers nervously on his coffee cup. He looked tense, a gaunt face, circles under his eyes, sloppy stubble on his cheeks. "Hi, Mom." He stood up as I approached and hugged me awkwardly. "You look good. Tanned." "Thanks." I sat down across from him. "And you look tired." "Is everything okay?" He sighed. "Not really, no. We're having financial problems." "Financial problems?" I marveled. "But you just bought a new house. And you got a promotion in college, didn't you?" "The house. That's part of the problem." Noah lowered his eyes. "We overestimated our options. The mortgage turned out to be too much, even with the help of Pearl's parents." "What about them? They're not helping anymore?" "Ethan's business has fallen on hard times," Noah grumbled. "Something to do with supplies from South Africa. I didn't go into details, but they can no longer support us like they used to." I was silent, waiting for the continuation, and it followed. "Mom, I know you have a lot of money from selling the house now." He finally looked up at me. "I was thinking, maybe you could help us out." "Not permanently, of course. Just a loan until we get back on our feet." That was it. I felt a wave of disappointment rise up inside, but not surprise. Somewhere deep inside, I'd expected something like this. "How much?" I asked calmly. He named an amount that made me raise my eyebrows. "It's almost a third of what I got for the house, Noah." "I know it's a lot," he nodded hastily. "But we'll pay it back, I swear. It's just that we're in desperate straits right now. Pearl could lose the gallery if we don't pay off some debts. And if we have to sell the house now, we'll lose everything we put into it." "What does Pearl think of you asking me for money?" I inquired, considering how she treated me before. Noah faltered. She's isn't thrilled, but she realizes there's no choice. Realizes there's no choice, I repeated slowly. "Interesting. When I asked permission to see my granddaughter, you had a choice, and you chose to keep me at a distance. When I asked to be invited to my christening, you had a choice too, and you chose to yell at me in front of your rich friends. But now that you want my money, there's suddenly no choice." Noah turned pale. "Mom, that's not fair." I was apologizing for the way we acted. "Pearl and I have both realized our mistakes." "Realized?" I shook my head. "Noah, since I got back from Europe 2 weeks ago, you haven't once called to see how I'm doing, invited me to visit, or offered to bring Lillian. The only thing you're interested in is my money." "That's not true." He raised his voice, then, noticing the stares of the visitors, lowered it to a whisper. "I was going to call, but we've had so much trouble." Pearl's on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Lillian's cranky, feeling the tension in the house. I just haven't been finding time. "Not finding time?" I echoed. "How convenient." "Mom, please." His voice trembled. "I know we don't deserve your help, but I don't know who else to turn to." I looked at my son, a grown man who looked so lost and helpless right now. Part of me wanted to help him, to protect him, just like when I was a child. But the other part, the wiser, stronger part, realized that this would only continue the unhealthy pattern of our relationship. "Noah," I shook my head gently, "I'm not giving you that money." His face contorted with frustration and anger. "What? But why?" "I mean, you have that money. You spend it on traveling, on some student who works at your store, but you can't help your own son?" "Exactly." I kept my cool, "because that money is mine. I earned it with hard work, years of saving, smart investments, and I have the right to spend it as I see fit, on travel, on business, on new friends." "New friends?" He grinned bitterly. "Will they replace your family?" "Perhaps." I held his gaze. "At least they appreciate me for who I am, not what I can give them." Noah opened his mouth to object, but then closed it, realizing the truth in my words. I will always love you, Noah. I continued more gently. You're my son, and nothing will change that. But I won't be your safety net anymore. You're a grown man, and it's time to take responsibility for your decisions. Even if those decisions ruin my family? His voice sounded almost pitiful. If your family is only held together by money, it's probably already destroyed, I replied quietly. Think about it. I stood up, leaving money for the coffee I never ordered. I hope you find a way out of this. And when you do, if you still want to have a real relationship not for money, but for family, my door will be open. The next day, I visited Terrence for an important conversation. I want to change my will, I said without preamble. Anything specific? He pulled out a notepad. Yes, I want my entire estate, the store, the apartment above it, all my savings and investments, to go to a charity for the lonely elderly when I die. Terrence raised his eyebrows. What about Noah? He's your only heir. Not anymore. I shook my head. Noah has proven he only values my money, not myself. I don't want him to get something after I die that he didn't deserve when I was alive. Are you sure? It's a big decision. Absolutely sure, I smiled. There are a lot of elderly people who really need help, who have no family, or whose families have abandoned them. I want my money to help them feel less alone, more valued. Terrence nodded. Good. I'll get all the paperwork ready. The year flew by. Life was filled with new colors, new people, new interests. I traveled twice more, to Spain in the spring and Scandinavia in the summer, each time returning with new experiences and antique finds for the store. Lori went from a temporary assistant to a true partner. Her fresh perspective and enthusiasm attracted young customers who had no previous interest in antiques. We even launched an online catalog, which greatly expanded our sales geography. With Oliver Redcliffe from London, we kept in regular contact, exchanged information about rare finds, sometimes traded for especially valuable specimens, shared professional secrets. Our business correspondence gradually became more and more personal, and his letters were increasingly filled with phrases like, "It would be wonderful to see you again," and "London misses you, dear Elizabeth." As for Noah and his family, we had little contact. After my refusal to give the money, he didn't call or visit. I knew from Helen, whose granddaughter attended the same kindergarten as Lillian, that they hadn't lost the house after all. Pearl's parents had recovered from their financial difficulties and helped them out. But our paths seemed to have finally parted. On my 76th birthday, I threw a small party in the garden behind the store. Helen and her daughters and grandchildren came, Lori and her college friends, several regular customers who had become good acquaintances over the years, Pastor Higgins, Terrence, and his wife. And, to my surprise and delight, Oliver flew in, especially for my birthday, with a gift, a rare Victorian brooch I'd once admired in his store. Tables were set in the shade of an old oak tree. Music was playing, conversation and laughter flowing. Looking at these people, some familiar all my life, others new to me, I felt a deep sense of gratitude and peace. Yes, my only son was not among them, and that hurt. But I was no longer letting that pain define my life. When the cake and candles arrived, Helen raised her glass of champagne. "To Elizabeth Wolfe," she said loudly, "the bravest woman I know. Here's to the next year, bringing even more adventure, joy, and love." "To Elizabeth," the guests chimed in, and I felt my eyes fill with tears, not from grief, but from happiness. "Thank you all," I said as the applause died down, "for being in my life, for helping me realize that 75 is not the end, but just the beginning." After the candles were blown out and the cake was cut, Oliver took me aside. "Elizabeth," he said, taking my hand, "I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I want to invite you to spend a few months in London, not as a tourist, but as my guest." He smiled embarrassedly. "It's silly to play games at my age. I like you very much, and I'd like to get to know you better." I looked at him, an elegant, intelligent man with kind eyes and a sense of humor who shared my passion for antiques and, it seemed, for myself. "You know, Oliver," I smiled, squeezing his hand, "I'd love to accept your invitation." In that moment, under the starry skies of Ardencroft, surrounded by people who appreciated me for who I was, I realized I'd found what I'd been looking for all my life, not just love and acceptance, but the freedom to be myself, to live by my own rules, to follow my own desires. I was finally free, free from guilt, free from exorbitant expectations, free from toxic relationships that suck the life out of me, free to value myself, free to love myself, free to live life to the fullest despite age and past disappointments. And that freedom was the most precious gift I've ever received.